Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Primero version 2 webinar and product launch. My name is Robert McTavish, and I'm the product lead for Primero. We have a lot of material to cover today, so I'm going to get started. To begin with, just a welcome message to everyone. It's a very exciting day for us. Couple of years in the making, so we're very excited and energized to share this information with you. We will be recording the webinar and sharing it with you later. We're going to do some fun stuff with the webinar, some different animations and changes to it. So if you want to access links for those things, try to follow us on Instagram at Child Protection Innovation and check our website, primero.org, to get links to the recording and the materials, and even a demo site where you'll be able to log in and try Primero version 2. So we encourage you to join our community, YouTube, our newsletter, Instagram, keep track. There's a lot of things changing right now, so that's the best way to track what we're doing. And please use the chat to ask any questions today. So we'll have our participants on mute and the panelists will be speaking. We'll do our best throughout the course of the webinar to answer any questions that you have in the links, in the chat. But then we'll have a good amount of time for an open Q&A at the end of the session. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join us, and we know everyone is very fatigued with virtual meetings. So we are going to do our best to make this a fun and interesting webinar. And so I'm going to start by telling you a story. And our little story begins just a bit more than 5 years ago. And like all good stories, it has its ups and downs. It has a great cast of characters, and it has some important lessons that we learned along the way. So it's early 2015. Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars is topping the global charts worldwide. Internet usage is up by over 800% since 2010, and new tech solutions are rapidly being adopted in the public sector. Innovation is the flavor of the day. In the protection sector, we're slow to adopt new digital solutions, and there are some successful systems being used at scale, such as the CPIMS and the GBVIMS. There's still a lot of apprehension about digital products, especially web applications. However, there is consensus that the status quo for protection data management is just not good enough, and that program effectiveness and data security are suffering as a result. And out of this moment comes a vision for a new product. And that product is a single and secure, robust solution for child protection and GBV data management, including case management and incident monitoring, and that product being developed and brought to a global scale. So, a thing of beauty was born. And now what you're looking at here is Primero version 1 in its early infancy. And we did a lot of things right, but as you can see, as I'm showing you this slide, we're also going to focus a lot during the webinar on what we got wrong. We had great plans for this product and a controlled set of global pilots and a rollout, but out of nowhere, Ebola hits West Africa, and Primero is thrust into the response in Sierra Leone. And so working with a really broad range of child protection partners and ministry officials, we introduced a digital case management solution for the Ebola response that helped facilitate services to tens of thousands of children, and remains to this day as the national social welfare data management platform. So Primero today, what is it? It is a web application, a platform that's configurable, it's extensible. That means it can adapt to new types of programming, new types of use cases. We treat it as a public good. We make sure that it's secure. It's managed through interagency governance structures, and it's supported centrally. It's modular, and we consider it fit for purpose for protection, supporting 3 core modules, the CPIMS+, MRMIMS+, and GBVIMS+. Primero has grown a lot over the years. We're now working in 32 countries, directly supporting 39 different programs used by somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 social services workers right now, representing more than 150 organizations. Our last counts, we were over 110,000 cases of vulnerable children and survivors of violence whose cases were being managed and services facilitated through Primero. But the strongest single aspect of Primero is the partnerships and the commitment to this shared idea and constant improvement of the product. driven by this growing collective of global partners, both technical and programmatic partners, in addition to the more than 150 organizations that have their users using Primero on a daily basis and supporting the product in the field. From the start, we always knew that we would have a requirement for constant feedback, constant course correction, and adjustments. And we had to be open to that. We had to be that proactive about that. And so as we began to achieve scale, some of the same issues were being raised across all implementations. And there are reasons for us to be really happy about where we are right now, but more importantly, our partners and programs are a constant source of insights and feedback about how we can improve this product. And by doing that, improve outcomes for vulnerable populations. So what I'm going to talk about now are some of the feedback items that we regularly get as a result of listening to our users and as a result of gathering that information and cataloging it and sorting it over the past 5 years. We've collected thousands of these items of feedback and suggestion points, and we've conducted hundreds of rounds of user acceptance testing and feedback. We call these pain points. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. The one that we hear probably the most frequently is around connectivity and how the application doesn't respond well in low connectivity settings. We've introduced an Android app to support low connectivity settings, but this is a major issue for us. Simply put, connectivity is a problem. Next, we hear a lot about frustrations that our partners have about being reliant on technology companies and vendors. They want to be able to configure, they want to be able to manage this product themselves. They want autonomy, and that's understandable. We also hear a lot about technical capacity and partners that, small organizations that may not have a technology for development person or may not have that type of support within their organization. They also need to access these tools, but they don't have the technical capacity to manage them themselves. Another major complaint that we hear is about this time that it takes to roll Primero out, especially in humanitarian contexts or where there is a humanitarian imperative. There is a need to act quickly, and that's a major issue for us. We hear a lot about the emphasis on programming and that sometimes the technology diverts our focus and our attention away from what's really important, and that is our core programs. We also hear a lot about the costs of this and that it diverts funds away from programs, especially from smaller organizations that don't have significant budgets that they can put towards digital products. We've heard about data entry being too cumbersome, that it takes too long for caseworkers, for example, to enter the information into the system, and that the system needs to be more intuitive and leave those people more time to do their real work. A lot of feedback is around coordination, getting everybody to agree on how this product should be applied, how it should be configured. When you're trying to harmonize practices, you're actually pulling people away from the thing that they're currently using. And maybe that is an imperfect system, but it's what they're familiar with. And so that element of coordination and bringing everybody towards a common set of practices is a main challenge that we face. And finally, and for me, probably most importantly, is around trust, data protection and data security. And why should we trust this system? So these are a list of the common complaints that we hear. And at this stage in the Primero journey, we think it's time to do a major reckoning with some of these persistent issues that are faced by our users and really introduce a new product that can be fit for purpose, addressing these pain points. So over the course of this webinar, we're going to be talking about these pain points grouped into categories. And this is what Primero version 2 is about. It's more than just a technology product. It's an open partnership. It's a set of processes. It's a set of practices. It's an alignment with programming, and it's a philosophy. So today we will demo the new product for you, in addition to some of the processes that we use to support and deploy it. We will share some information about our new sustainability model, including the proposed pricing going forward. And we'll discuss our plans for the future and hear your questions and have an open dialogue towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to jump into the webinar to talk about the software element. And when we talk about software development, you may hear us talk about this term called agile. And I really love this diagram because it does a great job of explaining a complex process in a simple way. What iterative development is it's the core of good software development. And it comes as a result of engaging with users regularly, getting the product into their hands early and listening to them and understanding what they need, understanding what's working for them and what's not. And this is also around this concept called the minimum viable product. So today we're going to show you our MVP for Primero version 2. And what we want to be clear with everybody about is that this is going to be a constant, there's going to be constant development and improvement on top of what you see today. I really do suggest you find this blog by Henrik Nyberg. It's a fantastic blog that explains the value of this development process. Now I'm going to jump in quickly to V2 designs. So this is the most exciting part, really. It's the entirely new look and feel of Primero version 2. And since we started working in 2014, user experience and web app design has come a really long way. So some of what we're going to do is address pain points directly through just a better design, a new look and feel, workflows that make work easier for our users, that make them actually want to wake up and open their instance of Primero and say, I'm so glad I have this tool because it actually makes my job much easier. We want our users to look forward to this experience, and we want to prioritize that. So we really insist on this constant feedback loop and constant engagement with users to make sure that the product's user-friendly. And that it's fostering good practices and essentially adding value for programs. Another concept here that is extremely important for the future of the product is that it works offline and on most devices. Now I'm going to explain briefly this concept of a PWA, a progressive web app, but essentially Primero version 2 is built on entirely new technology. And a progressive web app allows you to seamlessly switch between online and offline work without losing any data. The app will indicate if you've gone offline and it'll limit the functionality that requires you to interact with the server. But when you're connected again, your data will sync automatically. You don't need to do anything. And the screen size of the application responds to the type of device you are using. Right? So you can use this with your phone, you can use this with a tablet, you can use it with a PC, and the size of the application will respond to that screen size so that it's full feature. It's a full feature web app. Unlike our previous Android app, you can do everything from any device, any tablet, computer, or phone. Now, this is a game changer for us in low connectivity settings, but like I said, Primero version 2 is not only about technology improvements. So as a transition to the next presenter, I want to say that part of the solutions that we're going to present today are around changes to our processes, alignment with our product, and best practice programming. And I'm going to hand over to Gatien Jobit from the Alliance Case Management Task Force to discuss the work on the interagency standard forms. Good morning, good afternoon, Gatien, passing to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot, Robert, for the start of the webinar. So as you said, my name is Gatien Joby. I'm working for UNICEF. I'm representing the Case Management Task Force as a co-lead. So the Case Management Task Force is a group that falls under the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, and it's led by UNICEF and IRC. And why we are talking about the Case Management Task Force in this specific webinar, for one main reason is to talk about partnership. So one important thing that it's important for everyone to understand is that in the development process of the version 2 of Primero, Primero team has been working closely with a group of different task force and group of experts. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So the linkages between the case management task force and Primero, why we are talking about that right now. One important thing that we wanted to share with you today is the development of the new forms that has been done throughout the last year, and we are working towards standardization of the form. So historically, there were several set of forms that has been developed along the year. In 2010, we had like the previous version of the system with a set of different forms. Then in 2014, we had like specific forms that were responding to the need of unaccompanied and separated children. And then in 2019, there were some discussion around the willingness of having a new set of comprehensive case management forms that doesn't look at child protection concern, but looks at the process of case management as the standard of developing those forms. Next slide, please. So to develop those set of forms, it has been a big work that took over a year of effort with more than 30 specialists from different organizations that are sitting in the case management task force. So you have a set of organizations that participated in the process of revision, in development of the forms, and also interagency groups that contributed to and reviewed to the new form. In total, there were more than 12 organizations that participated in the process. And eventually, we have now 4 languages for all these forms that are available. So we came up with a set of forms that are available in 4 languages. So Arabic, French, English, and Spanish. So why we are talking about those forms right now? Mainly because in the child protection sectors, we are really aiming to have standardization of processes. And the linkages with Primero is now that, next slide, please. These forms that you can see on the left of the screens is now used and are being used to configure the new version of Primero CPIMS Plus. So when you will have the new system available, you will see that the Case Management Task Force Interagency Standard Forms are configured in a new version of CPIMS Plus. So we made some adjustment to make sure that the system is also representing the way the form were made on paper. So there were like some adjustment made to ensure that it's really reflecting the way the form should be used. And now the standard is available in the new version of the system. So what's new? As I said, the first important thing is that the standard instance is the baseline for V2. So it will make the system rapidly deployable. It doesn't mean that you cannot adjust the form and the fields according to the context. So the second point important to know is that you will still be able to do some configuration based on your context. One important thing also is that with this harmonization of the forms and the standardization of the instance, it will ease the process for information sharing with other modules within Primero, so GBV IMS Plus and MRM IMS Plus, but also with other information management system. One thing that we are in process of starting is that we are planning together with the Primero team and the case management task force, so planning to have an integrated training package that look both at the programmatic side of child protection case management and as in the use of the system for the child protection case manager and supervisor. So how they will use the system and how it's linked with the way they are doing their work on a daily basis. And one last point is that the new system also allows for a standard key performance indicator that will allow the harmonization of data analysis. And we will now show you how and what the GBV module is doing on this aspect, knowing that for CPMS Plus, the new key performance indicator are in the process of being finalized, and we are still on like working on that. But the GBVMS Plus team, they've done a great work on this specific aspect, and they will now show you what they've done so far on this. So I will let Christy take over from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Katzen. So following on from what we've built up to at this point, I think it brings up to the question to us is, what can Primero do to help us run programs more effectively, more efficiently? And one thing that it can do is help us make better decisions about our programs. So let's take a step back first and think about why that's helpful. To start, it's estimated that the average adult makes about 35,000 remotely conscious decisions each day. And researchers estimate that about 227 of those are about food alone. Just this morning, I've made about 4 decisions about food, and I've only been awake for about 20 minutes. But what about decisions at work? They require a lot more diligence in making sure we're taking in the right information to lead and contribute to our decision making. So how do you make those decisions? Do you talk to a bunch of caseworkers? Do you remember anecdotal information you heard on your last site visit? How do you decide to implement or to revise an intervention? How do you know if your program is meeting its aims? How do you make all of these decisions? So let's talk a little bit about how Primero can help with that. Over the last year, we've been building out a number of key performance indicators in the GBV module. Just to get everybody on the same page, when I say performance indicator, it's not an evaluation of staff. A performance indicator is a type of measurement of the performance of a process. It's a measurable value that shows you how we're achieving predetermined objectives. So if we think about it in really plain terms, these are indicators that can be used to measure progress against goals by providing a way for stakeholders, for service providers, for practitioners to understand levels of performance. So we've broken the KPIs in the GBV module into 4 broad groups, which is just helpful for this kind of presentation to be able to absorb all of these KPIs. KPIs that tell us about caseload, about services and access, about the case management process, and then also about referrals. So this is a list of the key performance indicators that are active in the GBV module. And I imagine a number of these will also be similar or the same in the CP module when they're live as well. So again, you have them in these 4 categories here. You have things that are on the more basic side, like number of incidents or number of high-risk cases. You have things that are going to help you look at how your caseload is performing throughout a process. So how many people are in the assessment status? How many have completed safety plans? How many are in the action plan status? How many have completed case closure? It's going to tell you things about how many referrals you've made, and really importantly, how many of those have been completed. How many referrals happened per service, and if there were delays in that. And then also things that are going to tell you about what services you provided, which again is something that we're all reporting on, but then something that's going to tell you a little bit more about your program, which is like client satisfaction rates. So this is just a broad introduction to the KPIs that'll be in the system. And on the next slide, we'll show you a sample of some of what this looks like in the system. So this is kind of a screenshot of what you'd see in the system. What we want to do is make sure this information is actionable and impactful for your programs. We want to have this information at your fingertips if you're using the system to inform your decision making. And that's what KPIs are. They're really a form of communication in a note form. They're short, succinct, and actionable with the right interpretation. And I'll come back to that last point in a second. The KPIs help us understand efficiency, effectiveness, quality, timeliness, service utilization, all the things you want to know about your program. If you want to know the number of cases, the time elapsed between the act of violence and when the survivor reported to a service provider, the KPIs give us that information. You want to know how long your cases are open, the KPIs can tell us that. And you want to know the reason cases are closed, they can tell us that too. So this is only a small sample of what's here on screen. There are many others that are in the system. And this is really a unique feature for Primero. Working on data systems just at IRC for the last 10 years, I can tell you that the things that other people are using are either insular to their organization that would tell you this kind of information, or they kind of stop at the data collection point. This is something that really separates Primero from everything else that's out there on the market in terms of case management information systems. We have our standardized forms that feed into these standardized indicators, and for which we've already been building a lot of familiarity, and we have a good foundation in the GBV community. But if you can imagine, as we build more familiarity around these KPIs, they can help standardize how the GBV community talks about and interprets GBV data, which is massively significant. If we want to move toward a better understanding of gender-based violence that moves beyond things that are more basic, like number of incidents reported or NFIs delivered, to something that will really help us understand the people accessing our services in a more holistic way, this is the way the field should be moving. And this is one example about how we're thinking about this comprehensively too. We're not just adding KPIs to the system and then kind of dusting off our hands and saying we're done. We're also preparing guidance in written and visual formats that talks about this from a starting point. So it talks about it in terms of data-driven decision-making versus intuition, that talks about outcomes and outputs. And what are the possible things even a simple indicator like the one on the screen, number of cases, could mean, which should help with misinterpretation of use. So we're really trying to pull out all of these details and give that guidance so that this product is more holistic from a programming perspective. And it's because of things like this.
So we have this good tool, but how do we deliver it? How do we get it set up and in the hands of the people who need it? So previously we were taking about an average to set up version 1 instance in about 2 to 5 days. So this is an IT team's time to set up the infrastructure. And on average, it was taking us around 20 hours to configure the system. So now we can deploy the infrastructure in under 30 minutes and configure the system in under 3 hours. So where was the time wasted and what did we do about it? So the reason for such an improvement is now we have a deployment process, which includes new technology and templates within the system. So what I mean by that is we have this unified approach to having a scalable, maintainable, secure infrastructure, where there is a consistent approach to security and where there's a process for improving it, stabilizing it, and as new features emerge or as new security threats emerge. So the case management task force forms that Gatien mentioned earlier are now the baseline forms that are available in the CPIMS Plus. And the GBV interagency forms make up the baseline of the GBV IMS Plus module. So having these types of standardized templates of best practice ensure we are deploying standard systems that can be easily localized by in-country teams without the support of a vendor. Therefore, the only thing that needs to be done by the technical team is deploying the infrastructure. So how do we get the system deployed and how do we get all of these good things to you? So I'm just going to switch over to a web form. I'm just going to share my screen. And this is essentially the web form that an authorized user is going to get access to. And what I mean by authorized user is essentially the person who is telling us, yes, we're going to hit go and we want a Primero system set up. So the first thing is we are going to fill out a web form, and it's very standard. So in this case, it's me, and I have some sort of an authorization code that I've been provided with. And I want to deploy a CPIMS Plus system. If there is any sort of payments involved, you'll be able to provide some sort of grant information. I know this is a multi-partner presentation. In this case, we're looking at something that's very UNICEF specific, but we would have that sorted out. In the example that we're going to walk through, we're going to do the baseline social welfare forms that we want in our configuration. And I want this to be in both English and in Thai. So a few more questions is that I want to be able to have locations data, and we pull locations data from places like OCHA's HDX, or you can upload this information. And for our presentation, my system administrator is going to be Pedro. I'm going to be purchasing a service of packages, which is going to be the Pro version, which Robert's going to walk through shortly. And I'm going to have a preferred URL. So I have something that's called Thai, care-thai-kids.primero.org. And we will always ask for assigned terms of use. One of the things that took a very long time in the last few years is getting assigned terms of use by all of the partners. This will be now required upfront to be able to provision your instance. So once I hit submit, this is now saying, yes, we're now going to hit go. And what does that mean? Just switching back to our slides. This means now we have a new instance of Primero. So now what? Now that I've submitted my form, my request is going to be processed and a baseline instance is now going to be available online. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Pedro, who's going to be my system administrator.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much. Your new Primero instance is online, as you can see. So our dashboards are empty. We have no cases, but we are going to the cases view, and I will pull up a new case to show you what the baseline forms are. So this is the basic structure we have, and inside of each group, we will have several forms. And I've seen, based on the configuration mapping that you have provided, that you'd like to make some adjustments to these baseline forms, having in light that you are making a deployment for the Ministry of Public Health in Thailand. So I will ask you to guide me through the changes you want to make, and I will apply them as we speak. Is that okay?
That's great. So the first thing I'd like to do is modify some of these forms. And I was wondering if you can add a specific form into this configuration. And I want it, because we're working with the Ministry of Public Health, I want it to be about the hospital administration data. So if you're able to first create a new form called hospital administration data, that would be great.
Okay, let's do it. So hospital admin data. There we go. And we will have this inside of which group? Do you have an idea?
Let's put it inside the identification and registration.
Okay, cool. And I'm saving, so our form is created. Now the next step is adding fields to this form. So I'll move to the fields section and I will add fields.
Cool.
And we will be adding new fields to start with. So we have several options, as you can see. So can you tell me exactly what fields would you like to add?
Yeah, I want to be able to have a drop-down where I can pick several options of the service departments.
Okay, so you want to choose several at the same time, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a multi-select for us. And this is the service department, correct?
Yes.
And which options would you like to add then?
So I put in the emergency room, and in the intensive care unit, and obstetrics and gynecology.
Okay. So there we go. We have a new field.
Great. I'd like another field where I want to be able to enter in doctor data about their visit comments.
Okay, so for that we would use an open text area where the doctor could write whatever they want. We'll call this doctor's comments.
Great.
There you go.
And then lastly, I want to be able to know the time and the date of when this visit actually happened.
Okay, so for that we'll use a date time field. And we will call it date of visit. And here we can choose for the system to default to the current date and time and to not be in the future. It's always helpful. And there we go. We have our fields created.
Awesome, thanks. But I want to make the visit of the date and time field the first field and not the last one. Can we reorder them?
Certainly. That's very easy. We just drag and drop.
That's great. I also think that we need to hide some forms, and I was wondering if we can adjust the form structure. We're never going to actually be doing tracing in our programming, and I was wondering if you can hide those forms.
Certainly, yes. So we can open the tracing form, and we can just play with the visibility of it. So we can say that we don't want this to be visible. So the baseline forms will still be available in our system. We can always turn this on later, but for now it will not be visible.
Great. The next one is, I want to be able to see a field and have it be repeated on multiple forms. So the one I'm thinking about is our protection concerns field, and I want it to be added to the assessment form as well. And maybe we can do it to the care assessment, or yes, the assessment.
Okay. So for that, we have this cool new functionality where we can add existing fields. And we can choose from the fields we have already in the system, either the baseline ones or the new ones that we have created. So we just need to look for the field we have. Protection concerns, here it is. And we just add it, yeah.
Great. So the forms are now looking good. And I know that Primero is very configurable in regards to its role-based permissioning. I don't want my caseworkers to be able to export data out of the system. Are you able to update that?
Yes, of course. For that, we can go to the roles page and we can edit our caseworker role. And you will see we have the ability to choose basically all the permissions that we have in the system. We can give them or revoke them at any point in time. So in this case, for the caseworker to see cases, we don't want them to be able to export anything. So as you can see, the export is not selected. So at this moment, they are not able to export.
Great. I want them to be able to see that new form that we just created though. How do I add that to their permission?
It's a very good point. So we have also here all the forms that this specific role should be able to see. And so that's another way of playing with the visibility and access levels. So we will just make this new form available. Let me just reload the page. Takes a little while. It's a long list, but everything you need is here. And there you go. We have our new form, and I will just make it visible for the caseworker as well.
Awesome. So I guess one of the last few things I want you to do is, because we're working with the Ministry of Public Health, I want them to be added into the system, and I want their logo to appear on the system. Can you do that?
Sure. So we'll create a specific agency for the Ministry of Public Health. And I will call this MPH. And we can add the logo for the agency. So I had it here already. And here we have the possibility of making the logo visible or not. So I will say we want it visible. And also, we can choose which services this agency is going to provide. And this is very important for the future referrals we want to do. So let's say they can do basic psychosocial care. So now let me switch to the caseworker view and show you how this is looking like.
Great.
So this is our caseworker dashboard. It's slightly different. I'll create a new case so that you can see the forms. And there it is. We just created the hospital admin data. Date of visit comes first, service department, you can choose, and doctor's comments. Yeah?
Yes, great. I guess one last thing. I did want the system to be available in both Thai and English. Can you tell me how it works to have them in our local languages?
Sure. So let me switch back first to the configuration mode, just to show you how easy it is for anyone in your team to come back here and translate specific fields. So I'm opening the consent form, and you see we have a section for translations inside of each form. So we can translate field by field directly in the system. And the way it looks, if I switch to the final version, well, 1 second. So we are fast forwarding, and this would be your final version. Let's do again. And you see here on the bottom left corner, we have this toggle, so I can switch between languages. And so if I choose Thai, everything will revert to Thai. Yeah. The
awesome.
Filters, the cases, everything.
Thanks. I think the last thing is, because I work for UNICEF, I need to do mandatory reporting. And I was wondering if I could have a specific report built to tell me the number of cases by age and sex.
Yes, certainly. Age and sex is actually one of the baseline reports we have already in the system. So if you navigate to your reports tab, you will see we have already the cases by age and sex. And this is how it looks like. And you can also export this table or graph to make further analysis if you need.
Great, thanks, Pedro.
You are welcome. So by this time, the system is ready for user acceptance test. So users may propose changes and we can adjust the configuration accordingly. And once everyone is happy, the system is ready to go live and the social workers may start entering real case data. And this is when we move into support mode and help you maintain your system in accordance with your sustainability plan, which is what Robert will explain next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pedro and Jan. That was a really excellent presentation. Let me just skip back to our PowerPoint and make sure that everything is lined up correctly here. Okay, so we now have our new instance of Primero. It's ready to go. Jan, can you confirm that this is viewing properly?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. So I am going to now proceed to talk about the sustainability plan, including the pricing model for Primero. And I'm going to use one of my favorite slides of all time to bridge that conversation. And that's this wonderful new phenomenon in the world called open source software. So wow, this product is open source and it's really good. It's really sophisticated and I want to get my hands on it. But now I'm wondering, well, how much does it cost? It's open source, right? So that means it's free, I believe, right? Free software. Well, that's not exactly the case. I like to make this comparison about open source software as being free, like getting a new puppy is free. There are many costs associated with deploying and maintaining any software. And we have to be very clear and transparent about that with our constituents and stakeholders. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Primero sustainability plan. Sustainability is a core principle of our work. It's not only about making sure that the product remains available, it's about commitment and due diligence to the individuals whose care depends on the system and whose data is being stored there. So it is a protection issue in itself, sustainability of the data. Our goal is to make Primero V2 as sustainable as possible and at scale. And true sustainability requires interventions on a number of fronts, including an organizational or stewardship front, the community sustainability, financial sustainability, and technical sustainability. And so we have a multifaceted plan that's being developed and monitored by the Primero board. And that board is made up of senior technology and program representatives from UNICEF, Save the Children, UNFPA, Terre des Hommes Lausanne, and International Rescue Committee. We're very dedicated to making this work, and we know that if partners cannot afford the product, they can't use the product. And we can't achieve scale if the product is too expensive, and that is essentially our goal, is to achieve scale and to make impact. So if we can't do that, then we will not succeed. But we also can't achieve our goals if we don't have the funds and other types of resources required to keep Primero growing and secure. So we have a multifaceted strategy for this. We are working with UNICEF to ensure the long-term stewardship of this product, both technically and programmatically. And we're working on a partnership model that will allow us to bring new partners into the fold. Our business model is based on the philosophy of the digital public good, and we're seeking out operational excellence. And the reason for these strategies is that to provide this at an affordable cost, we have to reduce waste and duplication. And in many of the places where we work, we find that UNICEF and its partners are essentially spending money on the same things. They're contracting the same types of services, they're paying for the same types of technical support, and we think that we can drastically reduce this duplication and waste by having a concerted and comprehensive plan for alignment. If we open ourselves up to new partnerships, that is new sources of revenue. So at the board and technical level, we're constantly seeking to broaden partnerships to bring new partners into the fold. And this is a way that we can both generate revenue and keep our costs and that duplication and waste down. As I said, we use this term now called a digital public good, and that has a very important bearing on the business model that we're going to share with you. We have no profit motive. We are going to operate with the philosophy of generating enough revenue to support, secure, and grow the product, and it is priced to be inclusive. So let's talk money. The packages of services largely determine the cost for Primero. So our modeling right now, which is based on fairly extensive marketing and engagement with our community, we think is very competitive. We have 3 different tiers of service that are broadly defined. Not everyone is going to fit into one of these 3 tiers, and depending on the required types of services, the cost may change. We also have to consider things like humanitarian imperative and other priorities that we have when we're considering our pricing model. The pricing is designed to encourage good practice, and we think that means working together. So on the one extreme, if it's priced too expensive, many small organizations might not be able to afford it. But on the other extreme, if it's very inexpensive, we are concerned that all organizations could easily afford to do it on their own, and that would mean that they're not working together with their sector and with their sectoral partners. So where is the happy medium? As we achieve greater scale, we are committed to pricing the product down. So the more people, the more implementations that we have paying into the central pot, the less expensive it becomes for everyone. And this process will be managed transparently, again, through the Primero Interagency Board. Our initial focus will be on UNICEF-led deployments in early 2021, and this is just because of the management exigencies. We are currently working on payment mechanisms that would allow UNICEF, as the steward of the product, to receive and process payments from non-UN partners. That's a hurdle that we have to get over in 2021. So initially, we're going to focus on UNICEF-led deployments. And this is, many of the participants on the call will be familiar with this model. Only one organization, lead organization in any implementation is paying for all of the users of that implementation. We don't want to limit the number of users or organizations on any implementation of Primero, because that's where the real value is. That is the good practice that we're looking to incentivize. So if UNICEF is leading a deployment in a given country and 25 organizations and all of their users are there with that UNICEF-led implementation, there's a single payment per year for that entire group of users with no limitation on the users. The tiers of service that we've defined here are largely driven by the demands from the field for Primero to be owned by different owners, essentially by a government, for example. So in the example of a government wanting to own and host their own instance of Primero and host it on their own server, we have a different modality for that, a different service modality, because we don't have immediate access to those servers. The service package changes a little bit. What we can provide, what we can offer changes a little bit. You see that indicated in the middle tier. With the UNICEF cloud, we have a very well defined privacy and data protection terms that has been collaboratively derived through long multi-year engagement with a broad group of stakeholders, so that we can, as UNICEF, host Primero on your behalf and provide secure deployment, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, full access to production support whenever you need it, automatic upgrades, patches, new features coming to you regularly, full security monitoring, and of course, access to all of our public documentations and community forum. But we also know that there are going to be organizations out there that just want to do it themselves. And this DIY column is basically all of the content, all of the technical support that you need to help you get deployed and underway. And then you're on your own. You can come, you can access the support through a central support contract. You can come and fetch upgrades and patches and fixes, but there's a little bit more of the onus is on you to make sure that your implementation is functioning correctly. So this is a broad set of considerations that we have come to over the last year. This at scale will be sufficient revenue for us to continuously invest in Primero, invest in the support structures that make it a successful product, and help us achieve that scale and impact over the long term. So I'm going to pause there, and I am going to open the floor for questions. We have a good chunk of time for Q&A, so please do come in with your questions, and we'll do our best to get the dialogue rolling.
I think I'm going to take I think one of the questions that was coming through was on interoperability. And maybe I'll start with that one. So one of the things that we've been really working on in the last 2 years, really, with the Primero Coordination Committee is trying to define parameters around interoperability. You know, especially in regards to the fact that we're working with such sensitive data, there has to be a lot of protocols in place before we design anything for interoperability. So one of the things that we've been working on between all of the interagency partners is getting consensus. How do we start, and what do we start with? And one of the things that we've decided on is interoperability for referrals. So currently what we're developing is the ability to do referrals between modules, so between the CPIMS Plus and the GBV IMS Plus modules, as well as between the CPIMS Plus and external systems. And the only data that's going to be shared is what's on the interagency referral form. I've put into the chat a link to our interoperability kind of fact sheet. And it really defines the process that we've been taking, our work plan, and the plan to have this available and in use in Q1 of 2021. This work has been going on for the last 2 years, as I mentioned. So now we're really getting into the crux of the actual development and working out where we're going to do these proofs of concepts. I don't know if there's any other comments that you guys would like me to speak towards on the interoperability, but please put that in the chat. Just going through the questions. So one of the questions is the configuration support to countries free? I'm going to ask that to Robert.
So the greatest investment so far in the version to redesign the product is to address this concern. Of all of the persistent issues that we had with Primero version 1, the most common was the difficulty in configuration. And a lot of us have worked with different web products over the years. You may have worked with ODK or Kobo Toolbox, things like that. They're very easy to set up because they're essentially monitoring tools or similar, the simple forms. With case management, it's a much more complicated thing. You have many different actors. They may all have different business processes and roles in the system. And there's just the need for a really significant and granular configuration. That's wonderful that we have a product that can do lots of these different things, but it did require a very technical person to be able to do that configuration. That was the main puzzle that we wanted to resolve with Primero version 2. We wanted to be able to give the autonomy back to the program and have this dependency on technology vendors broken. So the way we've done that is essentially with an entirely new tech stack. So there's a new database that's much more flexible and less brittle than the version 1 database. You can make changes to it in a much more sort of fluid way. Secondly, we've invested significantly of all of the user experience and UI design changes in V2. The biggest package of changes comes around the administrative model. And it's that module where you go in and you add roles and users and forms and workflows that has really been the bulk of our investment. So what we're hoping now is, I often use this sort of ratio of 80 to 20. So if of all the work that we've done in the past, we would have to actually set up Primero V1, you would be looking at usually around 80% of the time and money, essentially the effort, would be a vendor. And about 20% would be at the field level with partners looking at and making adjustments, system administrators making adjustments to the system. Now what we're going to do in lieu of that is we have this orchestration pipeline that's going to assemble a lot of the configuration that we used to have to do manually for you. And so by the time you get it at the country level, the configuration that you need to do is really a very self-service model. It's a drag and drop visual model that allows you to project it on a screen with your network, your partners in front of you, and you can literally just move things around and say, how does it look now? How about now? Is the form the way you want it now? And we think this is a really important key to unlocking and unblocking that coordination challenge that we've seen in the past. Because a lot of the time that we spend to deploy Primero is that harmonization, trying to bring our partners together around a common process that serves and meets the requirements of everybody in that in the sector, essentially. So we're hoping that you will be able to, once that product is in your hands, you're going to be able to take it over the finish line. A person with very, very modest technical skill. You do not need a specialist to do this anymore, and you'll be able to do that on your own. That is our hope. Jen, I'll let you take another question for us.
Thanks, Rob. One of the questions from Bridget is the 10,000 for all modules in one location, or is it 10,000 per module? And so then in one location who's operating GBV, CP, and MRM IMS Plus, it would be 30,000.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is, well, first of all, we'll set MRM aside from that for now, because it's a very different module in both in terms of the governance and the technical requirements for MRM. That's quite a bit separate. So that price point, we are largely right now basing that on, interagency use of a single module at scale. When we deploy, because of what Jan showed us earlier, when she was making the selections on the web form, we have now templated all of the different modules and forms essentially into configuration libraries. So when we deploy a Primero, we're not deploying GBV and CP at the same time. Those are two separate processes. Now they can happen together at the same time. That's not precluding that. It's just that generally the partnerships around GBV and CPIMS require two separate processes. We certainly would like to work towards harmonization on that. And in terms of the pricing model, I think this would clearly fall into like one of those custom pricing things. A lot of the costs that we would incur on behalf of that program would be reduced by having some shared resources. And if the partners at the field level were comfortable with that notion of shared resources, then we could reduce the price appropriately.
Thanks, Robert. One of the questions, just only because it's linking to the interoperability discussion I had mentioned earlier, question is on if the new system is going to be working with UNHCR's system Progress V4. So actually that's a big component of our work plan, and that we're working closely with, I think, Jessica Stewart-Clark, who's also on this call, and Kate McAllister from UNHCR's team. We're working closely with them on interoperability. So back to the referral use case of being able to share data only for the sake of service provision. That is something that we are working on, and we're working on defining which countries we're going to try and work this proof of concept out in currently. Another question is on There's a few questions actually on skip logic and linked lookups that I just want to answer all together. So that currently doesn't, that right now in this first minimum viable product of version 2, that's not a part of it, but it is on the roadmap for version 2. I don't know, Robert, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of requests. I mean, skip logic is obviously an incredible feature for usability. It really is a fantastic, for anybody who isn't familiar with it. In one field, when I respond to a series of values, if I say value 2, for example, then the subsequent field is only going to give me a follow-up question that's relevant to my choice in the previous field. So skip logic is a wonderful feature and really, really improves usability of the product. The challenge we've had with it in the past is the configuration requirement for it. So in addition to all of the other configuration overhead that we have, making, you know, perhaps dozens of forms interact and contribute to the same indicators, it's a very complex puzzle. If you add skip logic into that, what we found is that we were having a lot of problems with our teams in the field breaking the data structure. In version 2, we have a new backend database called Postgres, and it does support this in a much more flexible way. Our first, Jan was mentioning the roadmap and where skip logic falls. We will be implementing conditional validation this year, or sorry, in 2021, which is essentially based on an answer to one question, your choices for the next question are going to change. That will be delivered in 2021 as a part of our next package of development. And right now, the use case we're looking at for that is the Washington Group Standards for Disability Disaggregation. So we're very excited to see that in the pipeline. We also have essentially the equivalent of a VLOOKUP, cross-validation of data points in the system, where you can enter data in a field in one form and have it either populate or create a new data point in another form. So that can also be used for conditional validation. Back to you, Jen.
So a few questions I'm just going to group together. One on what's the timeline to launch fully to the public version 2, and how long will it take for V2 to be rolled out for our usage?
Yeah, these are all great questions. And I mean, nobody is more excited about having us in that point of readiness than we are here in the Primero team. The biggest challenges that we face for making this publicly available are around the business model. So as an international organization, we have accounting requirements and regulatory framework that doesn't easily allow us to receive payments for services from non-UN entities. So the Primero board is working very diligently on a model that would allow us to actually take revenue from partners of any kind, basically. And the notion here is that, you know, the more of those types of transactions that we can manage, we drive the revenue goes up, and then we can drive our prices down. We can also invest more into the product, and we can also make investments into the programs. So the goal here is to do this business model in a phased approach, where we start with what we know we can do right away, and that is processing the payments through the core UN partners. The next phase of that is going to be expanding out to partners within the sector, and each organization has its own rules and administrative practices. So the goal here is to try to find a model that works for the most number of partners possible, but we recognize that different organizations have different rules in terms of procurement, in terms of payments. So we are modeling that now, and early in 2021 we'll start with revenue generation, and we hope by the second quarter that we're going to be able to expand that to non-UN partners. Back to you, Jen.
Thanks, Rob. The next question that's kind of been voted up to the top is, what's the required investment to implement? Number of man hours from UNICEF, project management, and ministries. I'm going to start to take a stab at this and then hand over to Robert, but it really depends. As the deployment specialist for Primero, it really depends on the complexity of your implementations. I can honestly say in my last 2 years of working with version 1 of Primero, it can take as quick as 1 week to set up a system if you're using the baseline forms, if you don't have complex development needs, if you have in-country paper forms that are currently being used, harmonized SOPs that are being used, an ISP, an information sharing protocol that all partners agree to. These are all really fundamental to any implementation. I'm going to pop in the chat our end-to-end CPIMS plus ROLA guidelines, but essentially, if you have a lot of those building blocks already in place, the quicker we are able to move the work forward. But of course, the more complex it is, the more partners involved that need to be collaborated with and to get consensus with may also take a long time. But from a systems perspective, that average that I had mentioned earlier, before it was around 20 hours on average, regardless of the size. And it has been reduced down to a few hours just for setup of the system. But of course, everything else in regards to project managing, having those meetings, getting consensus, working through the requirements, it really just varies on your in-country teams. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything else to add to that one.
Yeah, I think that this is another one of the great challenges and opportunities of the work that we do. There are no two identical programs. And so as we move towards standardization around things like the interagency humanitarian case management forms, or the way that the GBV team delivers their case management for the GBV IMS Plus, we are, with each one of those steps, we're trimming away some of that additional effort, some of that additional work and complexity. But we live with the reality that no two programs are identical, ever. They're never two identical implementations of Primero. And if we want to do our work properly and we want to meet the standards of due diligence that we profess to, then we have to take this as a very case-by-case basis. I have yet to do an implementation in any country where the team just looked at what we presented them out of the box and said, yep, that's good, let's go with that. Let's just localize that, and everything else as you have it is fine. That's virtually never happened. And that's just the reality of the work that we do. There is no one size fits all. So I think it's a mistake. It's always a mistake to underestimate the level of effort. This is not like implementing a simple software for communications or monitoring. This is a core component in a successful system. And you know, we really don't want to give the impression that this is something that's fast and easy. It's not. If it's going to be done properly and sustainably, it does take time. It takes dedicated effort, and it takes an engagement. This is a multi-sectoral platform. It takes engagement. It takes work to dial this in and make it truly represent and add value for programs. So we definitely want to emphasize that, and we want to emphasize the importance of total cost of ownership assessments. We want to be extremely transparent about no hidden costs. And so in each place, we try to support those assessments before the decision to implement is made.
Thanks, Rob. The next question is on MRM. Will the MRM reports be able to link to response? For example, linking to the CP and the GBV systems?
Wonderful question. Well, that must be from a real insider. So yes, that is absolutely the gold standard, right? The whole genesis of this work is because within protection, in some of the places where we work, they're the same people working, or the same organizations are working together in those different areas of protection. And it just is not practical for them to be tracking, monitoring, case managing for one thematic area of protection, and then having to do that with the same population in a separate module in a separate system. So that very much is the gold standard that we're aiming for. Currently, our very initial piloting of this is really just around referrals between GBV and child protection case management, those two modules. But going forward, we're doing a complete redesign of the MRM IMS based on a lot of really valuable feedback from the field. And that's definitely one of our goals on the roadmap, that we'll be able to do referrals between modules. So thanks for that great question.
Another question on, back to costing, actually a few questions on costing. The first is from Shaquille about what's the costing if UNICEF is supporting the government, whereby the government will host the server?
Yeah, this is a really good question as well, because I'm not sure what organization you work for, Shaquille, but our goal, at least within UNICEF, and I mean, most of the partners that we work with, we're there at the behest of the government. We're there to support and strengthen national systems. And so what does that mean? It means sometimes our role changes. Sometimes we're supporting the government with technology services. You know, we're providing the infrastructure so that they can get started and get the ball rolling. We're even providing the technical, the knowledge transfer so that their tech teams can feel comfortable managing the platform. And we've had some success doing this. We've started implementations in, say, an emergency context. I gave the example earlier of Sierra Leone. And during the emergency, we use UNICEF infrastructure. But then over time, as the government partners' capacity grows to support the system, we actually port the system over. We transfer it to a government data center or a government cloud. Now, you can imagine that when Primero is hosted on a government data center, our ability to access it and to support it and to update it, for example, changes dramatically. And that does involve a different level of effort and different costs. So our ballparking of those three tiers, it is largely dependent on the deployment modality. And that middle tier that we talked about, that can take a few different shapes. Essentially, it can be, that can be a partner cloud. For example, we work a lot with the International Rescue Committee, and they have their own web services that they like to use. And so the ability for the Primero software as a service to deploy to their cloud is something we need to be able to do. But sometimes we have to deploy to a government data center. And what I would suggest in terms of pricing there is the pricing goes down because we're not paying for the hosting, we're not paying for all the additional infrastructure. But the actual amount of support that they might need, I think in that case, often goes up. And so that's why that price point is sort of, slightly elevated, is because the amount of tech support required when it's not in UNICEF infrastructure actually goes up. I hope that answers your question.
We have a couple questions that are on both the CP and GBV module. So one about, is it possible for a caseworker to use the same credentials accessing both the GBV-IMS Plus and CP-IMS Plus, especially if those staff are implementing both programs, or do they need to have different accounts?
So this is a really critical privacy by design consideration. Now, we do understand that in many places, these are the same teams that might be working with GBVIE or partners and other child protection services. And so we have an increasing demand from the field to have we'll call it a playbook for that exact situation. But it should be very clear that for each user of the system, there can only be one session at a time. So we can't have multiple people logged in with the same user. That should be very clear for security purposes. A single user can be configured to a role that has access to both GBV-IMS and CP-IMS plus modules. However, what we have not landed on yet as an interagency governance structure is what that would look like and how we would manage it. And so I really want to just, you know, that's a job for us. We're having our Primero annual meeting this week, and this type of concern and consideration is exactly what we'll be discussing. And I think you can look forward to guidance on that very soon.
Great. A question, is Primero being used in high-income countries?
Yeah, increasingly, I think, you know, part of this has to do with the maturity of the product and the fact that we use this term fit for purpose. We've done a lot of research of other applications and other tools that are currently in use. So part of my work and part of UNICEF's obligation is to strengthen existing systems. So we're not just out there, you know, advocating for Primero everywhere. Sometimes we have to try to support partners to improve or plug holes or upgrade the systems that they're currently using. And in our time doing that, we just haven't come across other products that are specifically designed for the kind of work that we do. So increasingly, high-income countries are interested in Primero, and we're working with, I mean, they're probably, right now, there are probably a dozen different conversations underway with high-income countries to use Primero. I mean, we've been approached by the US State Department to use Primero in the past. So I think part of that speaks to the fact that there aren't a lot of other softwares out there that do precisely what we do. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the change, the general change in the strategy of our programs, not just within UNICEF, but around the SDGs, and the significant focus now on monitoring protection everywhere in the world, not just in certain countries as a part of the SDGs. The sort of profile of protection and violence in the SDGs have led to a lot of high-income countries taking interest in Primero, and we're implementing in some, I'd say, I think upper middle-income countries now. Over.
Thanks. So I'm just going to answer a couple more questions live. Will the CP and GBV have a similar data set for the GBV cases, or is it something that needs to be completed in country? So we have the CP and GBV modules, both their baselines are made up of the interagency forms. So if there is any customization on the CP side, that would be done in country. I have Elfrida on the call, as well as Caroline, who are the GBV focal points for UNICEF at least, and Christy Crabtree on the IRC side. And they're on the technical team that roll out the GBV-IMS Plus. So if there are modifications that need to be made, that would have to be coordinated through the GBV technical team. I hope I answered that one correctly, Lindsay. Feel free to ask a follow-up. Another question from Bridget: if different partners in one location have their own version of Primero under do it yourself or a partner server, and then a coordination group develops an interagency instance, will these instances be able to link to the interagency version? Maybe I'll get Rob to answer this one.
Wow, lots of questions for me, Jan. Thanks. This is an excellent question. I mean, data structures can diverge, and you've all heard, you know, the terms apples and oranges. If one do-it-yourself instance has made decisions about its data structure that really make it diverge from the interagency data structure, we would have to reckon with that. That doesn't magically resolve itself. And so we are working with a really interesting and new product, an interoperability product called Open Function, that essentially would create that bridge, not only between modules of Primero, different instances of Primero, but also between Primero and partner systems like UNHCR's Progress v4 or DHIS2 or RapidPro. those types of platforms that are used at global scale that we commonly have to interact with, as opposed to building the direct integrations with those systems. We're investing in a product that's essentially a middleware that creates that bridge. And so that's something that we're exploring now, and that would provide a solution for that problem you've posed.
Thanks, Rob. And from Astrid, to Robert, given the investment requirement, which country is adopting on its own?
Astrid, it's a great question. I mean, generally, having worked with Indonesia a lot, a very high capacity country with a very, proactive government partnership, we almost always start from a position where our government partners say it is an absolute requirement that this product live in country. And that means that the services and the types of technology that we use are limited because we don't control those environments. So that DIY pricing, it's actually interesting that the customers, I'll call them, that are most interested in that are generally places where they have a very, very high IT capacity, and somebody from their department or from their ministry can go to our online resources, read and understand our software, and basically install and manage it for themselves. Now, the offshoot of that is that generally that person's salary costs a heck of a lot more than that UNICEF hosted instance that we in the tier on the right. So that's something I really want to emphasize to everyone, is that there are always costs associated with software. And by centralizing a package of services, what we're able to do is support those things centrally and sort of address costs that otherwise might be hidden costs, but they're there. They're most certainly there. And one day they're going to rear their head. And so when we see the difference of a few $1,000s between these tiers, my impression is that's many, many, many thousands of dollars of support in the form of contracts, the time and cost associated with administering procurement and paying invoices, having the staff that's available and ready to respond in an hour when your system goes down. All of those things are administrative and organizational costs that you don't actually have to take on if you opt for the service package. And this is really the promise of software as a service, and we hope the key to the sustainability of Primero going forward.
Thanks, Rob. Just being mindful of time, and we have 1 minute left. I put in the chat my email address, so if anybody needs access to our SharePoint pages that I've been sharing, just feel free to email me directly. We will have the demo version of version 2 that's going to be up on our support hub, and that is on support.primero.org. I'll put that also in the chat. We want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in this V2 launch webinar, and thank all of our panelists for their presentations. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or concerns, if you're interested in V2 and in Primero, and follow us on Instagram, and our handle is Child Protection Innovation.
Thank you, everybody, for joining and taking the time today, and keep your eyes on this space. Things are moving quickly. Have a great day.